Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Building the Republic Part 1. This is Part 1 of a few PowerPoint video presentations, so here we go. So the big key ideas we're going to talk about are the Industrial Revolution, the changing U.S. economy, change in social and class structure, slavery, and reform movements and religious revivals. We're not going to talk about all of these in Part 1. We're just going to talk about a few of them, but I wanted to introduce the big ideas for the entire unit right at the start of the presentation. So we're going to start off with the Industrial Revolution. So what was that all about? Well, key ideas that we need to know about. It began in Europe. The peak in England was at 1750, and at this point, England is at the peak of everything. It's just whooping everybody's behind. In the U.S., we started a little bit later because, you know, we fought a revolution in between there. So it took us a little bit of time to get back on track from that. So we start in 1800. The transition from an agrarian-based economy to the industrial-based economy is what characterizes this issue, this idea that we're dealing with, the Industrial Revolution. So I want you to think about what the term agrarian means. Contemplate that for a minute. Moving from agrarian to industrial. All right, this is something we're going to talk about in class. Then we have this dichotomy, this two-sided concern that we have to deal with, the factory system versus the cottage industry. And I'm going to explain what both of those things are in a few minutes. Then this issue of interchangeable parts. This was an incredible innovation in technology at the time. So I want you to take a look at the links below, and I want you to take a look at only what is important for our class specifically. Just to show you an example, I'm going to click on these links now so that you can see what these web pages look like and give you an example of what I'm looking for. So this is the Eli Whitney Museum and Workshop. So there's a lot of useful links up here that can help you learn more about this. But I want you to pay attention to this nice brief breakdown of what the factory is. I can give you the big picture ideas about the factory, but you're going to learn more if you take a look at a source like this and actually read it and take some notes on it. So I basically want you to just summarize each little paragraph in a bullet point or two, so that way you have the big picture key ideas. Okay, and it's not too bad, kind of long, but it's not too bad at all. And there's pictures over here if you want to get some visuals for those of you who are visual learners, so I think that'll be useful for you as well. The other website I want you to check out is this other link here, which specifically discusses interchangeable parts in its title. This is the History Channel, and it's got some real nice visuals for you to take a look at. It's got some speeches and it's got some primary documents and things that will help you successfully understand what the interchangeable parts idea was all about. And it talks about Eli Whitney in here as well, and it's got some videos here for you to play. I recommend, if you'd like some more info, to take a look at this video on the Industrial Revolution, and I think that'll be very useful to you. We're also going to talk about Lowell Mills, Massachusetts, and how important that was. But before we get to that, let me give you some background on the factory system versus the cottage industry. So with the factory system, you are bringing several different manufacturing steps together in order to make something more efficient. And by contrast, in the cottage industry, you have the worker buying the raw materials. They make one simple product that they then ship to the customer. So you don't have this issue of several steps. You have this one worker doing everything themselves. The factory system was fast, cottage industry was slow. Productivity was high with the factory system, productivity was low with the cottage industry. The factory system made goods more affordable, but with the cottage industry, it's only affordable for the rich. Now, here's the kicker. It sounds like the factory system is like the way to go. You know, this is excellent, excellent, excellent. There's no drawbacks. Everything's great, right? Well, the only problem with the factory system is that the quality of life for the worker was bad. Okay, it was not good. The quality of life for the worker under the cottage industry was actually quite good. So there's always an opportunity cost, okay? There's always something you have to give up to get something else. So as a society during this period, the American people are deciding, well, what's better for us? What are we going to give up in order to achieve all of these good things? And is it worth giving this up? And this is a discussion that we still have to this day. The factories at Lowell Mills. This one was really important because it's the first really major factory in the United States, and this is in Lowell Mills, Massachusetts. Most of the workers were young women. They worked in horrible conditions. They had very little freedom, and I want you to check out this link. It's the Internet History source book. This is really awesome. This is a direct primary source from this lady, Harriet Hanson Robinson, okay? And she provided an account, as it says here, of her earlier life as a female factory worker. And so I want you to read this and take notes, because more than anything I can tell you, getting the story straight from the horse's mouth, from somebody who actually experienced this, that's what's going to teach you the most about history. So this is a primary source that I want you to take a look at, and I want you to take notes. So that's going to be very important. It's going to help you understand what the factory system was actually like. All right, now we're moving on to the changing U.S. economy. Super exciting. So an important thing I want you to keep in mind is that we changed economic systems. We started with mercantilism, and then we shifted over to capitalism. To review, mercantilism, the goal was to increase the economic power of the state, okay? You wanted to export more than you imported. You wanted to have as much gold as possible. And this is why Europe had colonies, because they exploited the colonies to get more wealth, to get more gold, and to be successful. So the colonies were the ones who suffered in favor of the state. By contrast, capitalism, the goal is individual rights. Okay, we want private ownership of property, and you want the state and the economic system as separate as possible. Our founders looked at capitalism and said, hey, listen, government was really restrictive. It was oppressive. Okay, and in order to keep government from gaining a lot of economic power, we have to keep them out of the economy so that we, the people, have the freedom to do it ourselves. So you have to understand that this move to capitalism really grew out of what our founders experienced under the thumb of King George III and of the British Crown generally. So it's very important to keep that in mind. You have to understand the historical context, and only then can you understand why we switched from mercantilism to capitalism. All right, so the National Bank. This is going to become a huge issue. I'm going to bounce back in time a little bit to the first administration, to George Washington's administration, right when our nation started. This was first proposed by Alexander Hamilton, who, of course, was a rabid Federalist. And his goal was to handle the national debt and create a national economy. He felt it was important that we create a framework for individual Americans to be able to thrive within a national economy. We needed to give them some sort of setup in order for them to have success. So the first national bank lasted from 1791 to 1811. It was privately owned, but there was only 30% domestic ownership, which means 70% of that national bank was owned by other countries. So that's something to think about as far as how that might have affected the running of the national bank. The second national bank lasted from 1816 to 1836. It was still privately owned, but this time we have a huge switch. Only 20% foreign ownership, which means 80% of the ownership came from us specifically in this country. Now, we know about the Federal Reserve, and that we have this big central bank that dictates our interest rates and a lot of other big important issues in our national economy. The national bank that I'm talking about here is not that. There is no real central banking structure until we see the Federal Reserve in 1913. So this is a very different era. I don't want you to compare the national bank to the Federal Reserve, because they're two completely different things. So some economic panics. Now, we had a panic in 1797. We had the recession of 1802. We learned about the Depression of 1807 specifically because that was as a result of the Embargo Act of 1807. So that was a problem. We're going to learn about the Panic of 1819. And then there were also a couple of recessions that I just want to mention to you. The recession of 1822 to 23 and the recession of 1825 to 26. So which ones do we care about right now? Well, obviously, we care about the Depression of 1807. That one was important. As I said, it's a direct result of the Embargo Act, and it resulted in the halting of trade, which in turn caused the halting of the economy. Then we have the Panic of 1819. So what was that all about? Well, some really bad banking policies helped to cause the panic. You have a lot of speculation. Then we have a massive drop in crop prices. And because we're still largely based on farming, this resulted in a halting of the economy, because since the farmers weren't getting the money they needed, they weren't able to go out and buy stuff and in turn reinvest money into their farms. So this created a domino effect where they stopped buying stuff, so other people stopped making stuff, so they had to lay off workers, and then those workers don't have money, so they can't buy stuff, and you see this crazy domino effect that occurs. So that's what the Panic of 1819 was all about. It was not good times. Then we have this development of new industries, which is something I want to talk about. And this is all part of the Industrial Revolution. Technology is a major factor. New inventions and processes allowed for more production. processes are, this is the steps you take to perform something, right? And since we came up with new and better ways to make stuff, that allowed us to increase the amount of stuff we made, and it also made it cheaper for us to do it, which in turn allowed other people to actually pay for the stuff. So now, because things are cheaper to make and cheaper, cheaper to produce, they're also cheaper to buy. So that means people who previously couldn't get access to certain goods were now able to afford them. So that's very important. Organization of labor was a major factor. You see the beginnings of labor coming together to try to figure out how they can make their working life better. And we see the development of the cottage industry, where people worked from home in making goods and they sent them to central distribution centers or directly to the customer. Okay, and then after that you have the development of the factory system, which in turn made things more efficient. That's one of the new processes that I'm talking about. Now we see some changes in social class and structure. Amazing stuff. So the old social hierarchy of Europe. Rich, white, aristocratic men controlled society, and they had all the political rights. Nobody else had any. Patriarchy was the rule, and social divisions were based on birth, not merit. So if you were born into wealth, you had wealth. If you weren't born into wealth, you were never going to have it. Basically, there was no way to move through the social classes. There was no social mobility in the old social hierarchy. Now, the American social hierarchy. We have no aristocratic class. Birth is no longer the sole determinant for your social position. You can make it and be socially mobile if you want to. Merit-based success was very common, so that means it was based on what you did, what you were capable of, what you accomplished, not on who your parents were or what type of class you were born into. You had more egalitarian marriages. Egalitarian is basically equal. So there was more agency for women. Women had more choice. You had more parental involvement with children, and political rights were now available to most white men. Now, this is not to say that it was okay that African Americans and women did not have voting rights or did not have political rights. That's of course not okay. But at this time period, you have to think about the context. There were massive advancements made because now most white men were able to vote as opposed to only one class of white men. That's a major advancement. If that advancement didn't happen, then women and African Americans and other minorities would not have access to vote today. So it's important to see the progression. One step leads to another. So that's an important idea to know. So marriage could now be by choice. It rose out of this thing called Romanticism, which came from Europe. I'm going to talk about Romanticism in a later video presentation when I talk about reform movements. Partners actually chose each other instead of the father automatically choosing for his daughter. Patriarchy did still dominate. Women could choose their partners, but once they were married, men pretty much had the sole discretion and decision-making powers. Women still did have few rights, but at least they could choose who they were going to marry now. And that is the end of part 1. I hope you learned what you needed to learn, and I will see you in the next video.